My name is Daniel Cruz. I'm 41, and in 11 months I buried both of my parents and found out exactly who my brother was. I sold the family house in Chillicothe, Ohio, bought a small place outside of town near the Scioto River, and on the third morning there, my brother Kevin walked in through the unlocked back door, sat down at my kitchen table, and told me I owed him half of everything. I didn't argue, I made him coffee. And 3 weeks later, I handed him an envelope in front of 30 people at his own 4th of July party on property that wasn't his yet and never would be. But what happened in the 26 days between that morning and that party, that's the part nobody saw coming. Not Kevin, not his wife Shelley, not me. Welcome. This channel is for people who showed up while everyone else made excuses, who kept the receipts when the rest of the family kept the holidays. If you've ever been the quiet one in a loud family, this one's for you. The 14 months before my father died were the kind of months that don't show up on a resume, but age you faster than anything else will. My father's name was Ronald Eugene Cruz. He'd worked 31 years at the Mead paper mill in Chillicothe before his knees gave out and then his lungs started following. Copped first. Then the small strokes, one in February, one in April, one in September that took most of his left side grip and about half his short-term memory. My mother, Patty, had her own situation, type 2 diabetes that she'd managed badly for 20 years, and a left foot that the vascular surgeon in Columbus told us in March was a conversation we needed to have seriously. I worked nights at the time. Dispatcher for a regional freight company, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week. The kind of job where you drink bad coffee and watch trucks move across a screen, and everybody forgets you exist until something goes wrong. I asked my supervisor, Gail, if I could shift to a split schedule, 2 nights on, 1 off, 2 nights on, so I could be at my parents' house on Maple Street during the day. Gail said yes before I finished the sentence. She'd done the same thing for her own mother 12 years earlier. She just nodded and said, "Whatever you need, Danny." So that's how I lived for 14 months. Sleep from 7 a.m. to noon, drive to Maple Street, help Dad with his breathing treatments, help Mom check her blood sugar and rotate her foot dressing and argue gently about whether she needed the compression sock on the left foot or the right one. Make dinner, drive back, clock in at 10. Watch the trucks move across the screen until 6. Kevin visited 4 times. I want to be clear about that number because for a long time afterward, people in our family said things like Kevin's got a lot going on, and you know how he is, Danny. 4 visits in 14 months. His contracting business, Cruz Built LLC, was 20 minutes away in Waverly. He had 2 employees and a Ford Transit and a wife named Shelley who scheduled everything on a shared Google Calendar that apparently had no room for Maple Street. I wasn't angry then. I was too full of other things to be angry. There was a spiral notebook on the kitchen counter where I wrote things like Dad's inhaler refill Tuesday and call Medicare Ray. The Walker and Mom's appointment Columbus 8 a.m. leave by 6. That notebook was where my brain lived. The version of me that had feelings about things had been set aside for later, like a book you put face down and mean to get back to. Dad died in February, not slowly like we'd been expecting. He had a good week, actually. He'd been alert, eating better, watching his John Wayne westerns in the recliner. I was at work on a Wednesday night when Mom called at 2 a.m. She said she'd woken up and he was just gone. Peaceful, she said. His hands were folded like he'd done it himself. I drove to Maple Street and sat with him until the funeral home came. Mom sat in the kitchen in her robe and didn't cry. She just kept straightening the dish towel on the oven handle, over and over, something to do with her hands. Kevin arrived the next morning at 10. He cried in the living room. He hugged Mom for a long time. He asked if there was anything he could do. I told him there was a list on the counter. He looked at the list. He said he'd make some calls. He left by noon. Mom lasted 7 more months. The foot got worse. The diabetes stopped responding the way it should. She started sleeping more and eating less, and by September she had that look the hospice nurse described to me once as turning inward. She was still there, she just wasn't all the way there anymore. She died on a Thursday morning in October, in her own bed with her hand in mine. The same hospice nurse, a big-shouldered man named Curtis who drove out from Columbus twice a week, sat with me for an hour after. He didn't try to fill the silence. He just stayed in the chair by the window and let me be in the room with it. The funeral was the following Saturday. Kevin gave the eulogy. He'd written it on his phone the night before. I could tell because he kept tilting the screen toward the light from the window. He cried again. Shelley rubbed his back. Afterward, at the house on Maple Street, I was standing at the sink washing the punch bowl when Shelley came up behind me. She had a woman with her I didn't recognize, mid-50s, auburn highlights, a fleece vest with a Realty logo embroidered on the chest. Shelley introduced her as her friend Tammy, just here to support the family. Tammy shook my hand and said she was so sorry. Her grip was firm. She held it a beat longer than necessary. Then Shelley said, almost as an afterthought, Danny, did your parents ever talk to you about what they wanted to do with the house? Like long-term? I set the punch bowl in the drying rack. I didn't answer. I picked up the coffee carafe and walked it back to the dining room table and refilled 3 cups. When I came back to the kitchen, Kevin was standing in the doorway from the back hallway, the one that led to my father's study. I hadn't seen him go back there. You good? He said. Yeah, I said. He nodded once and looked past me at the window above the sink. 3 months later, on a cold Friday in January, we sat in the conference room at Halpert and Mills, the small estates firm on Paint Street that had done my parents' paperwork for 20 years. Gary Halpert read the will. He was 67, careful, the kind of lawyer who double-checks his own citations. The will was specific. The house at 214 Maple Street, plus its contents to me. The codicil, signed and notarized 8 months before Dad died, stated the bequest was made in recognition of Daniel's sustained role as primary caregiver to both Ronald and Patricia Cruz during their final years. The remaining assets, Dad's $401,000, the savings account at Huntington, the F-250, and a small whole life policy, split 60-40 larger share to Kevin to account for the house's appraised value. Gary said the intent was rough equivalence, though we'll use the word balance. Kevin's jaw went tight. He didn't say anything during the reading. Shelley did. Her hand went up. Mr. Halpert, real quick. Didn't Ron take out a business loan through Cruz built a few years ago? Like a personal guarantee situation? Gary looked at her over his glasses. There's no record of that instrument in the estate file. Right, but if it existed, wouldn't that affect the... There's no such instrument in the file, Gary said, the same words, the same tone. Shelley nodded slowly, just asking. I signed the acknowledgement page. I shook Gary's hand. I walked to the parking lot. Kevin and Shelley were 10 steps behind me. At my truck, Shelley caught up. She put her hand on my arm. Her nails were recently done, a dark red. Danny, she said in her reasonable voice, we should sit down like adults. There's no reason this has to be a whole thing. Kevin just wants to feel like the family was fair to both of you. I looked at her hand on my arm. The will's what Dad wrote, I said. I didn't write it. She gave me a smile that didn't reach anything. She let go. That afternoon, I drove to the Halpert office, asked the paralegal to pull a certified copy of everything, and drove to the Huntington branch on Bridge Street. I opened a safe deposit box, number 188. I put the copies inside. I locked it myself. That night, back at my apartment, I noticed the small iron key to Dad's fireproof lockbox hanging on the pegboard in the utility room. Dad had bolted the pegboard above the washer himself in 1987. The key had hung in the same spot my entire life. I didn't open the box yet. I told myself I'd wait. 5 months passed. I lived alone. I worked nights. I closed the door to the room I'd been using as an overflow storage for Dad's files and didn't open it. I let a lot of things sit. One Saturday in April, I was standing in the middle of the living room of my apartment with a cup of coffee, and I realized I was done pretending the apartment felt like home. It never had. I'd rented it 11 years ago as a temporary situation and just never left, the way you don't leave things that are adequate. I called a realtor Monday. I started looking at small houses outside of town, closer to the river. By May, I'd found what I was looking for, a 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre outside of Chillicothe proper, 1 owner, updated roof, a detached garage I could actually use. $187,000. I paid cash from the Maple Street sale and closed in 22 days. I didn't tell Kevin until the contract was signed. I called him from the Kroger parking lot on Bridge Street because that's the kind of call you make from a parking lot. You sold Mom and Dad's house, he said. His voice had that tight quality it got when he was composing himself. It's been mine since the will, I said. I couldn't stay there. I heard Shelley's voice in the background. Kevin covered the phone. When he came back, he sounded different, looser, practiced. Listen, he said. Shell and I have been talking, and honestly, Dan, the business has had a rough stretch. We could really use... I'm in the Kroger parking lot, I said. I have frozen stuff in the car. I hung up. I should have understood then what was coming. Any person with a clearer head would have. But I'd spent 14 months running on logistics, and I still hadn't fully switched back to a person who saw things coming. I just kept moving. The new house needed work. I spent 3 weeks on it, painted the interior, replaced a bathroom faucet, cleared the garage. The fireproof lockbox came with me in the back of my truck, personally loaded, wrapped in a moving blanket. I set it on the workbench in the garage when I got there and put a tarp over it. Moving in date, first weekend of June. The house wasn't much by most standards. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, the kitchen original to 1974, a back porch that needed new decking. But it backed up to a field that ran down to a creek tributary, and in the morning with coffee on the porch you could hear the water from there. I'd done the math 4 times. The mortgage was nothing. I could carry everything on my dispatcher's salary. Kevin called twice that first week. I answered once. The call was fine on the surface, how's the house, how's the move, and then at the 8-minute mark he said, Shell thinks we should have a conversation about the business loan situation. I told him there was no business loan in the estate file. He said he knew that, but there was a handshake agreement with Dad that he thought deserved to be honored. I said, write that down and have a lawyer look at it. He went quiet. I said I had to go. I'd given Kevin my address 2 weeks earlier when he'd asked. He said he wanted to send a housewarming card. I said sure. He hadn't sent one. On a Sunday morning, June 8th, I was on the back porch with coffee when I heard a vehicle in the driveway. Kevin's Ford Transit, Cruise Built LLC stenciled on the side in blue, pulled up next to my truck. Kevin got out in a t-shirt and work shorts. Shelley got out in white jeans and a striped top. Behind the Transit, a second vehicle. A silver Camry. Tammy, the realtor from the funeral, same fleece vest, different logo. They had not called, they had not texted. They had just appeared on a Sunday morning with a realtor. Kevin knocked on the front door. I walked around from the back porch. Hey, he said like this was a reasonable thing. Kevin, we were in the area. He wasn't in the area. Waverly to here is not in the area. Thought we'd see the new place. Shelley gave me a hug I didn't return with my arms. Danny, she said, it's so good, really rustic. Tammy hung back by the vehicles with her phone out, taking photos of the exterior. I looked at Kevin. Who told her she could do that? She's curious. She does appraisals sometimes. Tell her to stop. Kevin turned and made a small gesture at Tammy. She put the phone in her vest pocket. I let them in because it's what you do. I made coffee. Kevin walked the house the way Trent had walked the condo in the original story. Slow scan, buyer's eyes, checking ceilings and floors. He opened the door to the attached garage without asking. Shelley sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded. She had the same soft, concerned face she'd worn at the funeral. Danny, she said, we're worried about you out here. Alone. You know this is a lot of house for one person. It's 1,400 square feet, I said, and it's what I can afford. What you can afford, she repeated, like I'd said something worth examining. See, that's the thing. Kevin's been carrying a lot of stress about the business, and I just think, honestly, if you had any idea what the last year has been like for us financially. Kevin came back from the garage. He'd seen the lockbox under the tarp. What's in the box? He said. Dad's things, I said. He looked at me for a second. You took Dad's lockbox. It was in the will, I said. House and contents. His face did something complicated. That box has been in that house since I was 8 years old. It came with the house, I said, which came with the will, which you were present for. Shelley stood up. She tried a different angle, the soft one. We're not here to fight, Danny. We're here because we love you, and we think maybe there are things in that box that belong to both of you. As brothers. Tammy was now standing in the kitchen doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. I didn't invite her inside, I said. Shelley looked at Tammy. Tammy stepped back onto the porch. Kevin sat down at the kitchen table. He put his hands flat on it. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this. I want to see what's in the box, he said. I think Dad would have wanted us to go through it together. When you're ready to have that conversation, I said, have your lawyer call Gary Halpert. Kevin's hands came up off the table. Come on, Danny, Gary, seriously. We're brothers. I know we are, I said. He looked at me for a long beat. Then he looked around the kitchen. Then he stood up. You know what your problem is? He said. You've always thought you were the good one, Dad's favorite. The one who actually showed up. You've been building that story for 30 years and now you're cashing it in. I picked up my coffee mug. Kevin, I said, you have a party in 3 weeks, 4th of July. You're doing it at the house on Maple Street. He went still. The house was sold, I said, closed on the 28th. The new owners took possession last week, a young couple. They were very excited about the backyard. The color moved in Kevin's face. Shelley turned to him. You said the closing wasn't until July? I thought, Kevin stopped. I looked at Tammy's shadow on the back porch through the screen door. You should probably reschedule the party, I said. They left 9 minutes later. Shelley didn't say goodbye. Kevin paused at the front door with his hand on the frame, the same gesture as in the original, same energy, a man trying to find a closing line. He didn't find one. The Transit and the Camry pulled out. I stood at the kitchen counter for a minute, then I walked to the garage. I pulled the tarp off the lockbox. I looked at it. Dad had bought it at a hardware store in 1986 when the business papers started multiplying. Gray steel, fireproof rated to 1,200 degrees, a combination lock he'd set to the last 4 digits of our childhood phone number. I still knew the combination by heart. I didn't open it, not yet. I went inside and called Marion Halpert, Gary's daughter, who had taken over the estate's practice 2 years earlier when Gary went semi-retired. She was 39, second-generation estate's lawyer, and she answered on the second ring on a Sunday because Gary had raised her that way. "Marion," I said, "it's Daniel Cruz." "I saw Kevin Cruz called the office Friday," she said. "Twice?" "Yeah," I said, "I figured." "Tell me," I told her. She asked me to email her the voicemails. She told me to document everything, dates and times. She told me not to engage. She said, "Monday morning, 9 o'clock. I hung up. I got the spiral notebook, not the hospice one, a new one I'd bought at Walmart when I moved in, and I started writing. Sunday, June 8th. Kevin and Shelley arrived unannounced 9:22 a.m. Tammy present with vehicle, took exterior photos without permission. Kevin entered garage without permission, identified lockbox. Attempted to claim joint ownership. Left 9:47 a.m. I underlined the part about the photos. Kevin called that night, and the next morning, his voicemails had a shape to them. First one casual. "Hey, I just want to talk. Call me back when you're done being dramatic." Second one, injured. "Danny, I don't know what I did to make you like this. Shelley thinks you've never forgiven me for something, she doesn't know what. Neither do I, just call." Third one. Escalating, "I talked to a buddy of mine who does real estate law. He thinks there might be something to the handshake loan argument, just so you know." Fourth one, the threat. "I'm going to talk to Gary on Monday. I think there are questions about how that codicil got added that he needs to answer." I transcribed all 4 onto the spiral notebook. Word for word. I emailed Marion the audio files and the transcriptions. The fourth one I listened to twice. He'd said questions about how that codicil got added. I wrote that sentence down and put a box around it. Gary Halpert had an affidavit from the signing, 2 witnesses, a notary. Both my parents separately interviewed. On the same day, same office. I knew this because Gary had told me so at the reading, and because I'd read the documents in box 188 at Huntington twice. Kevin could ask all the questions he wanted. The codicil would answer them. Monday at 9, I was in Marion's office. She'd cleared an hour. She read everything on her laptop. She read it the way her father read things, slowly, annotating in the margins of her notepad as she went. When she finished, she set her pen down. "Daniel," she said, "the codicil is clean. The witnesses are clean. The affidavit is clean. The handshake loan claim has no documentation, no witnesses, and no standing. Kevin can hire a lawyer. That lawyer will tell him exactly that." She paused. "Tammy's a problem. Unlicensed appraisal activity and predatory solicitation under color of family relationship. I'd like to write a letter to her broker." "Write the letter," I said. "I'll also write one to Kevin, one to Shelley. Cease and desist, effective immediately. Any further contact comes through me." "Okay." She took her glasses off. "Can I ask you something as someone who's watched this situation from the file side for 2 years? "Sure. Why didn't you do this in January?" I thought about it for a while. "I kept thinking he'd read Dad's letter," I said. "I kept thinking one of these days he'd just read it and understand it and choose to be different. I didn't want to be the one to make it legal. I wanted him to just choose it." Marion nodded slowly. "The letters will be ready Thursday," she said. She paused. "Kevin's 4th of July party." "Yeah. He's still advertising it. I saw the Facebook invite. He hasn't told his friends the house sold." "I know. He's going to show up at a house that belongs to someone else." "I know," I said. "That's going to be a thing." She looked at me for a moment. "Do you have someone to go with? To wherever you're going to be when it happens?" I thought of Marge. I thought of Caroline. I thought of Terry Goss, my supervisor Gail's husband, who had been my father's friend for 30 years and who had sat in the back row at both funerals and not said much but stayed the whole time. "Yeah," I said, "I think I do." The Thursday before the 4th, I opened the lockbox. The combination was the last 4 digits of our childhood phone number, 7-7-4-1. The lock turned on the first try. The contents were what I'd expected from a man like my father. His military discharge papers, DD-214, rubber-banded and flat. His and Mom's marriage certificate, 1979, Chillicothe Courthouse. The deed to the Maple Street house, original 1988, already transferred in the estate process. His union card from the mill, laminated. A small photograph of his own father, my grandfather, standing next to a tractor somewhere flat and brown. And in a white envelope paperclipped to the inside lid, my father's handwriting on the front, for Daniel. I sat down on the garage floor. The letter was 3 pages on lined yellow paper, his print handwriting, careful and angular the way engineers write. He dated it 7 months before he died. He said he knew what I'd been giving up. He said he and Mom had talked about it, and they'd both seen it, and neither of them had said enough about it out loud. He said he'd watched Kevin from a distance for years, and he knew what Kevin was, and he wasn't angry about it, but he wasn't going to pretend either. The second page got harder to read. He wrote about the 2 a.m. nights. He wrote about the Saturday I'd missed my buddy Carl's wedding because Mom's blood sugar had crashed and I'd spent 4 hours at the Adina ER. He'd been in the room. He'd heard me call Carl and say I couldn't make it. He wrote, "I should have told you then. You were the one." The last paragraph was short. "Kevin will come for the house. I know it because I know him. Don't let him. Not because you owe me, because you earned it, and because you need somewhere to rest. Rest now, Danny. You've been going for a long time." I sat there on the garage floor for a while. Then I folded the letter back into the envelope. I put it in the interior zip pocket of my jacket, where I'd left my heart for most of the last 2 years. The 4th of July was a Wednesday. Terry picked me up at 4 in the truck. He brought his wife Linda and their neighbor Dave, who'd worked the same mill shift as my father for 22 years. Dave brought a 12-pack and said very little, which was exactly right. We drove out to the reservoir outside of town, where the county did the public fireworks. There was a field next to the water where people set up lawn chairs, and somebody always brought a grill. It was the same spot our families had gone since I was 7 years old. Kevin's party at the Maple Street house was supposed to start at 5. I knew what was going to happen because Marion had told me. The new owners, a couple from Columbus named the Kellermans, had called Gary Halpert's office on Monday. Kevin had texted them asking if he could use the backyard for a 4th of July party, framing it as a family tradition. The Kellermans had said no. Kevin had texted back saying he'd already invited 40 people. The Kellermans had called the Chillicothe police non-emergency line and given a heads up, just in case. Terry and I were setting up chairs at the reservoir when my phone went. Marion. "It's happening," she said. Kevin had shown up at Maple Street with a truck bed full of folding tables, 2 coolers, a portable speaker, and Shelley's brother with a cornhole set. The Kellermans were standing on the front porch. A patrol car was parked at the curb. "Is he being cooperative?" I said. "Apparently he's been cooperative for about the last 4 minutes, Marion said. Took the non-cooperative part before that." I looked out at the reservoir. The sun was starting to angle. Dave was opening a beer. Terry was untangling the lawn chairs with the quiet focus of a man who had untangled many things. "Do I need to be there?" I said. "No," Marion said. "Stay where you are. The cease and desist was served this morning by certified mail, his signature on file. If he contacts you tonight, I want the time and the content." "Okay, Danny," she paused. "Go watch the fireworks." I put my phone in my pocket. Terry handed me a lawn chair already untangled. Linda passed me a can. Dave was looking out at the water. "How you doing?" Terry said. "Ask me in an hour," I said. He nodded. He sat down in his own chair. We looked at the water. At 7:48, Kevin texted. I read it once and forwarded it to Marion without responding. It said, "I hope you're happy. You embarrassed me in front of our whole town." Some of those were Dad's friends. I wrote down the time and the content on the spiral notebook I'd brought in my jacket pocket. I didn't reply. At 9:15, the fireworks started over the reservoir. Terry and Linda watched with their heads tilted back. Dave cracked the second to last beer. Somewhere behind us, a kid was running with a sparkler. My father used to bring 2 lawn chairs and a thermos of decaf and set them up in this exact field, and he and Mom would watch without saying much, just sitting there together in the dark with the light breaking overhead. I thought about the letter in my jacket pocket. "Rest now, Danny. You've been going for a long time." The fireworks broke open over the water and the color came down and I let it. 26 days after the 4th. The cease and desist letters had been served by certified mail the previous Thursday. Marion received a call from Kevin's attorney, a general practice guy in Waverly named Fitch, who told her in the measured language attorneys use with each other that his client understood the situation and did not intend to pursue further action. Fitch charged Kevin $580. Tammy received a letter from the Ohio Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing opening a review of her conduct. Her broker called Marion the same day to say that Tammy had been reminded of her obligations and that the broker was very sorry for any inconvenience. Shelley deleted me from her Facebook. Kevin sent one text 11 days after the 4th. No opener, just, I read what Dad wrote. I don't know what to say yet, but I read it, I saved it. I didn't reply. At the end of the month, I added up the numbers. $1,240 in legal fees. 3 letters served. $0 conceded. 0 further incidents. 1 house on a half-acre outside of Chillicothe with a back porch and a creek you could hear in the morning. On the morning of day 27, I went back to the lockbox. I'd been through it twice. I thought I'd seen everything. But that morning, I lifted out the stack of documents from the bottom, and underneath them, in the very corner of the steel floor, was a small folded square of paper I'd missed both times. It was a receipt. Hardware store in Chillicothe, 1991, for a combination padlock. And on the back, in my father's handwriting, the combination written out, 7741, our phone number. And underneath that, one line. In case you forget, you won't forget. He'd written the combination down on the receipt and put it in the bottom of the same box the lock was on so I'd have it if I ever needed it. That was exactly the kind of man he was. Practical, quiet, 2 steps ahead in the small ways that actually mattered. I sat in the garage with the receipt in my hand for a while, then I folded it back up and put it back where it was. I locked the box. I went inside and made coffee and took it out to the back porch and listened to the creek. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when there's nothing left to collect. That's the whole story. 1 lockbox, 3 letters. A party that happened at the wrong house. And a receipt in the bottom of a box that told me everything I needed to know about my father without using a single extra word. If this reminded you to keep your own documents somewhere safe, take that. Drop a comment, hit subscribe.